When you live in a community of over 200 townhomes, life is never quiet. Every morning, you can hear the same symphony: garage doors clattering open, tires crunching on asphalt, dogs barking as they're rushed out for quick walks before work. Kids shuffle toward the school bus stop, and sprinklers tick on in neat synchronized patterns, feeding lawns trimmed to nearly identical lengths. From a distance, it looks orderly, almost idyllic. But beneath that surface, order doesn't come free. It's manufactured, managed, and policed by an entity that's both invisible and ever-present: the WA Board of Directors. I serve on that board. 7 of us, volunteers elected by the homeowners. We don't get paid, and most days, it feels like we don't even get thanked. But we make decisions that affect everyone: budgets, maintenance, landscaping, community events, enforcement of rules. Some treat us like heroes, others like villains. The truth lies somewhere in between. I'm the secretary, which means I take notes, manage official records, and draft more emails than I care to admit. My handwriting has become the community's permanent record: meeting minutes, resolutions, contracts signed and stored in neat binders. It's not glamorous, but it matters. And when mistakes happen, the paper trail often decides who shoulders the blame. Blank, underscore, blank, our WA doesn't run itself. Like most associations, we hire a property management company to handle the day-to-day operations. They answer homeowner calls, coordinate vendors, manage collections, and send violation letters. In theory, they're our staff. In practice, the relationship is more complicated. The management company has its own employees, managers, assistants, accountants, each juggling multiple communities at once. Ours is just one of many on their roster. Sometimes they treat us with professionalism. Other times, with the impatience of someone handling yet another file in a stack that never ends. The board has set a simple rule for them: they can approve expenses up to $500 without coming to us. Anything more requires bids, discussion, and board approval. That's not unusual, it's standard practice. We're talking about community money here, pooled from monthly assessments paid by every homeowner. A misstep doesn't just drain numbers on a ledger, it betrays the trust of 200 families. And yet, as I would soon learn, even the clearest rules can dissolve in the fog of miscommunication. Blank, underscore, blank. The first time I heard about the $6,000 payout, I thought it was a joke. One of my fellow board members called me in the middle of the day, their voice tight. "Did you approve a vendor payment for landscaping? Over $6,000? No," I said immediately. "Why?" "Because management says the check's already been cut. $6,000. 12 times the discretionary limit. Enough to repaint a dozen townhomes or resurface a whole stretch of sidewalk." And it was gone. Paid out without bids, without board approval, without even an email. When I pressed for details, the story made less sense. Apparently, one employee at the management office thought another had gotten the green light. A crossed wire, a missed memo, and suddenly a vendor had been hired and paid. To their credit, the management company admitted the mistake quickly. They called it a miscommunication. A harmless word, soft and vague, as if $6,000 could slip away as easily as a typo in a text. Blank, underscore, blank. By the time our next board meeting loomed, I was simmering. I kept replaying the scenario in my head. We had rules. We had safeguards. We had a fiduciary responsibility. And still, money walked out the door. What stung most was the predictability of it. If the board had been consulted, we wouldn't have approved that vendor. We'd worked with others who charged far less. We would have demanded bids, as we always did. Instead, we were blindsided. I hadn't even seen the invoice yet. Just a number, $6,000, dangling in the air like a thundercloud. Blank, underscore, blank. As secretary, I knew my role in the upcoming meeting would be pivotal. The minutes I recorded would shape the narrative. Was this an honest mistake, or a serious breach of duty? Were we a competent board, or a complacent one? I began drafting questions. Who authorized the vendor? What services were rendered? Why was the $500 limit ignored? Can we recover any of the funds? What safeguards will prevent this from happening again? I rehearsed them in my head like a lawyer prepping for trial. Blank, underscore, blank, as if that weren't enough. Another bomb dropped the night before the meeting. At 10:30 p.m., my email pinged with a new message from the management company. Attached. A 16-page contract for next year's services. A note accompanied it. Please review before tomorrow's meeting. We'll need to vote on renewal. I checked the timestamp. The contract had been sent barely 25 hours before the meeting. 16 pages. One of our biggest annual expenditures. Dropped in our laps with less than 2 days to review. I skimmed the document, my eyes heavy, but I couldn't absorb it all. Legalese blurred into jargon. Service descriptions melted into fee schedules. By midnight, I knew one thing for certain. There was no way I could vote on this contract in good conscience tomorrow. Blank, underscore, blank. I leaned back from the glow of the laptop, staring at the ceiling. It struck me as almost surreal. Within a single week, our management company had misfired a $6,000 payment and dropped a contract on us at the 11th hour. And yet, we were supposed to smile, nod, and carry on as if this was just business as usual. Not this time. I closed the laptop, my mind already planning the confrontation. Tomorrow's meeting wasn't going to be routine. It was going to be a reckoning. The number haunted me. $6,000. I wrote it in the margins of my notebook in thick, dark ink, underlining it twice. That figure wasn't abstract, it was very real. It represented months of dues collected from families across the community. Every homeowner who cut a check each month for $275 had just chipped in for someone else's mistake. The way management described it, the story was almost comical. 2 employees in their office, juggling different communities, wires crossed. One thought the other had secured board approval, the other thought the first had secured bids. A nod here, a shrug there, and suddenly a vendor was hired, an invoice generated, and a check signed. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the money was gone. Paid. Cashed. Out of reach. Blank, underscore, blank. When I first heard the explanation, I actually laughed, out of disbelief more than humor. You're telling me, I said to Dan, our property manager, that a $6,000 expenditure slipped through because of an internal miscommunication? Dan gave me the same tired shrug he always did, the one that meant what do you want me to say? It shouldn't have happened, he admitted. But it did. We caught it quickly, and we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Make sure? I pressed. How? We have a discretionary cap of $500. That's written down, in black and white. How does a 12-fold violation of that cap happen without a single red flag? He spread his hands. Look, mistakes happen. It wasn't malicious. The work was done. The vendor was paid. End of story. End of story. The words rattled in my chest. No, this wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning. Blank, underscore, blank. I started digging into the details. The vendor, it turned out, had been hired for landscaping services, emergency pruning of trees after a storm, supposedly. But we'd had storms before, and I knew roughly what those costs looked like. $1,200. Maybe $2,000 at the outside. Not $6,000. Even more suspicious, this vendor wasn't one of our regulars. We had 3 companies we usually sought bids from, each familiar with the property and willing to compete for our work. But this invoice had been given to someone entirely new. Who picked them? I asked Dan. One of my assistants, he said vaguely. She thought approval had been secured. From who? From me. And you thought approval had been secured from us. Yes. And so $6,000 walked out the door. He winced but said nothing. Blank. Underscore. Blank. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a chasm, staring down into the void between what should have happened and what had actually occurred. In theory, our processes were clear. In practice, they were as sturdy as wet paper. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. If this mistake could happen once, what was stopping it from happening again? How many other miscommunications had drained our reserves without us noticing? The financial statements we received each month were dense, line after line of numbers. I had always assumed the details were accurate, that management was following protocol. But now I began to wonder. How many of those numbers hid shortcuts, errors, or worse? Blank. Underscore. Blank. That night, I stayed up late combing through old statements. I circled charges that seemed high, underlined payments to vendors I didn't recognize. The amounts weren't always huge, $800 here, $1,100 there, but they added up. I imagined standing in front of the homeowners at the annual meeting, explaining why their dues were going up while our oversight was this sloppy. I imagined the looks on their faces, the anger, the distrust. And I felt a flush of shame. I was the secretary. It was my job to ensure accuracy, to safeguard transparency. Yet here I was, blindsided by $6,000 vanishing into thin air. Blank. Underscore. Blank. In the days leading up to the board meeting, I rehearsed what I would say. This was not a harmless mistake. It was a violation of protocol. It betrayed the trust of every homeowner. I decided I wouldn't accept platitudes or shrugs. I wanted accountability. At the very least, a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. At best, reimbursement, either from the management company or from the vendor who had been paid without proper approval. Blank. Underscore. Blank. But as I replayed conversations in my head, I realized how difficult it would be. Management companies are masters of deflection. It was a mistake. It won't happen again. Lessons learned. Moving forward. They speak in cliches until you give up. That was my fear. That the rest of the board would sigh, nod, and move on. After all, $6,000 spread across 200 homes came to $30 each. Hardly a crisis in anyone's personal budget. But in principle, it was enormous. If they could get away with this, they could get away with anything. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The morning of the meeting, I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. You're not here to make friends, I told my reflection. You're here to protect the community. It felt dramatic, like something out of a courtroom drama, but I needed the mantra. Otherwise, it would be too easy to fold under the practiced calm of Dan and his assistants. I packed my binder with financial statements, the bylaws highlighting the $500 limit, and a list of pointed questions. I wasn't going to let them spin this as harmless. Because it wasn't harmless. It was $6,000. The clubhouse always felt a little too small when the 7 of us gathered for board meetings. A long folding table stretched across the front of the room, where we sat with papers spread out like shields. Rows of metal chairs stood ready for residents, though only a handful usually showed up. The air smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. Someone always brewed a pot and forgot about it. That night, however, the room buzzed with tension. Word of the $6,000 payout had circulated. Not everyone understood the details, but the number itself was enough to make homeowners suspicious. People shuffled in, whispering to one another, clutching copies of the agenda as if they were court summonses. I sat at my usual spot, secretary's binder open, pen in hand. My notes would shape the minutes, the permanent record. I reminded myself of that fact with each deep breath. Tonight, words mattered. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The president, a retired contractor named Greg, called the meeting to order. His voice carried authority, but I noticed the tightness in his jaw. He hated conflict, and tonight promised plenty. After the usual formalities, approval of last month's minutes, a brief treasurer's report, we arrived at the agenda item everyone had been waiting for. Next item, Greg said, glancing at his notes. Unapproved expenditure, landscaping vendor, $6,000. Property management will provide context. All eyes turned to Dan, the property manager. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and began. As the board is aware, he said smoothly, an internal miscommunication at our office resulted in a vendor being engaged without the usual bid process. The work was performed after the recent storm, which caused significant damage to trees on the property. The vendor was paid promptly to ensure resident safety. This was an unfortunate mistake, and we've already taken steps to prevent similar issues in the future. He paused, as if waiting for applause. None came. Blank. Blank. I raised my hand. Dan, may I clarify a few things? Of course, he said, flashing his practiced customer service smile. First, I said, flipping to a highlighted page in the bylaws, our management agreement sets a discretionary spending limit of $500. Correct? Yes. And this was 12 times that amount. He nodded stiffly. Yes. So at what point in the process did someone say, this seems fine, instead of alerting the board? Dan hesitated. One of my assistants believed I had already received board approval. I, in turn, believed she had confirmed it. It was a crossed wire. A crossed wire worth $6,000, I said flatly. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Blank. Another board member, Linda, leaned forward. She was pragmatic, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who spotted typos in financials at a glance. Dan, you said the work was for storm damage. What exactly was done? Tree pruning and debris removal, he replied. Then where's the invoice? Linda pressed. We've asked, but I haven't seen it. It's being finalized, Dan said quickly. Finalized? She repeated, raising an eyebrow. The vendor has already been paid. Dan's smile faltered. They submitted a preliminary bill. The detailed invoice is forthcoming. Linda sat back, unimpressed. Mark, our treasurer, spoke next. Dan, we have a history of paying around $2,000 for storm cleanups of this scale. Why was this 3 times higher? Emergency response rates vary, Dan said, defensive now. This vendor was available immediately. Safety was our top priority. Greg, the president, tried to calm things down. Look, we can't undo the payment. The work is done. What matters now is preventing it from happening again. But I wasn't ready to let it go. Greg, with respect, I said, we can't just shrug off $6,000 as if it's a parking ticket. Homeowners deserve answers. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a violation of process. And if we accept miscommunication as an excuse, what's to stop it from happening again? More murmurs from the residents. One woman in the back raised her hand. Are our dues being used responsibly or not? Greg's face tightened. He hated open dissent. Dan jumped in, voice firmer now. Let me be clear. There was no malice here. No theft, no fraud. A mistake was made, but the community benefited. Trees were pruned, debris cleared, hazards removed. Residents were safer because of it. Residents would have been safe with bids, too, I shot back. And at half the cost. The room buzzed again, louder this time. Another board member, Carl, finally spoke. He was known for his bluntness. So what you're telling us, he said, staring at Dan, is that because 2 people in your office didn't talk to each other, our community paid thousands more than necessary. And we're supposed to just say thank you? Dan flushed. That's not what I. Yes, it is, Carl interrupted. Applause broke out from a few homeowners. Blank, underscore, blank. Greg rapped his gavel. Order, please. The noise died down, but the energy in the room had shifted. For the first time, the homeowners weren't just listening. They were siding with us, the board, against management. I seized the moment. Dan, we need specifics. Who authorized the vendor? Who signed the check? And what written safeguards are you putting in place so this never happens again? Dan swallowed. I'll provide a written report with those details by the end of the week. That's not good enough, Linda said sharply. We want the report before the next agenda item. Tonight. More applause. Blank, underscore, blank. The meeting stretched on for another hour as we pressed Dan with questions he struggled to answer. Each vague response fueled the residents' frustration. By the end, Greg summarized the consensus. The board is not satisfied with this explanation. We will table final action until the invoice is received, but let the record reflect that management overstepped their authority and violated the discretionary spending policy. I scribbled the words quickly in the minutes, making sure they'd be preserved for the official record. Dan sat stiffly, his smile long gone. Blank, underscore, blank. As the meeting adjourned, homeowners clustered around us, voicing their support, their anger, their confusion. You need to hold them accountable, one man said firmly. This is our money. I nodded, feeling both the weight and the power of his words. For the first time, the board had leverage. And I wasn't about to waste it. The tension from the $6,000 payout still hung in the air when Greg tried to move us forward. His gavel had barely settled against the table when he flipped to the next agenda item, discussion of management contract renewal. I nearly laughed. The day before, at 10:30 p.m., I'd opened my email to find a message from Dan's office with the subject line, "Renewal contract, please review before tomorrow's meeting." Attached was a 16-page PDF, the management company's proposed agreement for the next year. 16 pages. Legalese, service descriptions, fee schedules. Sent barely 25 hours before this meeting. I had skimmed it, but there was no way, no responsible way, I could vote on it tonight. And judging by the puzzled, weary expressions of my fellow board members, I wasn't the only one. Blank, underscore, blank. Greg tried to keep his voice even. Dan, do you want to walk us through the highlights of the contract? Dan, still stiff from the grilling he'd just endured, straightened his tie. Yes. The agreement is largely similar to last year's. Standard renewal. A few updated clauses, some adjustments for inflation in the fee structure. Nothing unusual. Nothing unusual? I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. It's 16 pages long. We received it yesterday. That's unusual. Linda nodded in agreement. Dan, this is one of our biggest expenditures as a community. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. And you expect us to approve it with 1 day's notice? Dan spread his hands, as if confused by our resistance. It's a standard contract. We've been working with you for years. The terms aren't radically different. That may be true, I said, but none of us have had time to review it properly. I refuse to vote on something I haven't read thoroughly, researched, and questioned. Blank. Underscore, blank. Carl, the bluntest of us, leaned forward. Feels like you're trying to rush this through. Especially after the $6,000 mess, that doesn't sit well. A murmur of agreement came from the residents in the audience. Dan raised his palms in mock surrender. No one is rushing. The renewal date is approaching, and we wanted to get it in front of you. If the board prefers more time, that's your prerogative. But you phrased your email as if we'd be voting tonight, I said. He hesitated. That was the assumption, yes. Assumption, Carl repeated dryly. Funny word, given the week we've had. The audience chuckled. Dan's jaw tightened. Blank, underscore, blank. Linda spoke again, flipping through her printed copy of the contract. I've already spotted several sections I want clarified. Termination clauses, indemnity language, late fee percentages. These are not trivial details. And the management fee increase, Mark added, pointing to his copy. 5% across the board. We need to compare that with industry averages before approving. I leaned forward. Dan, with respect, this is sloppy. You send us a 16-page contract one day before a meeting, expect us to vote, and when we push back, you call it standard. That's not how fiduciary responsibility works. Applause broke out in the back rows. The residents were on our side. Blank. Blank. Greg rapped the gavel again. Order. Let's stay professional. He looked at Dan. Why wasn't this sent earlier? Dan gave a little shrug. Our office has been busy. Multiple communities, overlapping contracts. It slipped through. Carl muttered, another miscommunication. Blank. Blank. At that point, I decided to make my move. I cleared my throat, raised my hand, and spoke deliberately, my words meant for the record. I propose that we table the discussion of this contract until we have sufficient time to review it thoroughly. That means reading, researching, and asking questions in executive session without management present. We owe that to ourselves and to the homeowners. Linda nodded immediately. Seconded. The president looked relieved. He hated confrontation but also hated liability. All right. Motion to table until executive session. All in favor? Hands shot up. 6 of the 7 board members. All opposed? Dan raised his hand. Alone. The motion carried. Blank. Blank. The residents clapped again. Some even laughed quietly, enjoying the rare sight of the board standing firm against management. Dan, however, didn't laugh. His face reddened, his tie now slightly askew. He leaned into his microphone. I want the record to reflect that delaying the contract could put us in breach if the renewal deadline passes. Linda snapped back. Then you should have sent it earlier. Don't make your procrastination our emergency. Cheers from the audience. Blank. Blank. Greg rapped the gavel once more. That's enough. The motion has passed. Contract discussion is tabled. He turned to Dan. Provide us with a clean, final draft no later than 2 weeks before the next meeting. And be prepared to answer questions in writing. Dan nodded stiffly, his smile forced. Very well. Blank. Blank. The rest of the agenda passed in a blur. Landscaping updates, violation reports, the usual noise. But the energy in the room had shifted. For once, the board wasn't the villain. We were the defenders, standing between the homeowners and a management company that had grown too comfortable, too casual with our money and trust. As I gathered my notes at the end, residents came up to thank us. Finally, one man said, the board's asking the right questions. Another woman added, don't let them bully you into signing anything fast. Take your time. I smiled politely, but inside, I was exhausted. This wasn't over. The $6,000 payout was still unresolved. The contract would come back to haunt us in executive session. And I knew Dan wasn't going to forget the humiliation. But for the first time, I felt like we had leverage. And leverage, in WA politics, is everything. The following week, we gathered in the clubhouse again, but this time, the seats were empty, the doors closed, and no property managers sat across from us. It was just the 7 of us, the elected board, meeting in executive session. No audience, no management company, just us, the people who were supposed to represent 200 homes and their collective dues. The air felt different without Dan and his assistants. Lighter, less rehearsed, but also heavier, in another way, because now there was no one else to point at. This was on us. Greg, as president, started things off. All right, he said, rubbing his temple. We need to talk frankly. The $6,000 payout. The contract. Where do we stand with management? No one spoke for a moment. The silence pressed in, broken only by the faint hum of the HVAC. Finally, Linda leaned forward. I'll be blunt, she said. I don't trust them anymore. Not after that payment. Not after trying to rush a 16-page contract down our throats. Mark nodded slowly. I agree, but we have to weigh the risks. They've been managing us for years. If we fire them, we'll need a new company. That's not a quick or painless process. Carl, ever the straight shooter, crossed his arms. I don't care if it's painless. They broke the rules. $6,000 gone. If one of us had signed that check without approval, we'd be crucified. Why should they get a free pass? They admitted it was a mistake, Greg countered, though without much conviction. Of course they admitted it, Carl snapped. They didn't have a choice. But admitting and fixing are two different things. What safeguards are in place now? None. I glanced down at my notes. As secretary, it wasn't my job to dominate the debate, but tonight I couldn't stay quiet. We're not just talking about one mistake, I said. We're talking about a pattern. Carelessness. Complacency. They assumed we wouldn't ask questions, and when we did, they panicked. That contract was a test. They wanted to see if we'd rubber stamp it. If we had, we'd be locked in for another year with higher fees and vague obligations. Linda nodded. Exactly. And the timing wasn't an accident. They gave us 1 day on purpose, hoping we'd feel pressured to vote. Greg frowned. That's speculation. No, Linda shot back, that's experience. I've been on boards before. This is how management companies operate when they think the board is asleep at the wheel. Mark, the treasurer, raised his hand. Let's not forget, they do handle a lot competently. Dues collection, vendor coordination, day-to-day operations. If we push too hard, we risk them walking away, and then what? We scrambled to find a replacement. Transition costs alone could run into the tens of thousands. Better to bleed once than 1,000 cuts, Carl said. The room fell silent again. Finally, Susan, one of the quieter board members, spoke. She was a schoolteacher, calm but firm when she chose her words. I think we need to slow down, she said. We're talking about firing them, but let's not forget, they're still our management company right now. Residents expect stability. What we should do first is demand accountability. Written guarantees. Transparency. If they refuse, then we escalate. I nodded thoughtfully. So, step 1. Formal reprimand. Step 2. Renegotiation of contract terms. Step 3. Replacement, if necessary. That's reasonable, Susan said. Carl muttered, too reasonable. Greg leaned back, folding his arms. All right, let's outline our options. 1. Renew the contract as is. 2. Renew with amendments. 3. Put the contract out to bid and consider new companies. Linda snorted. Option 1 is off the table. Period. Carl banged his fist lightly on the table. Agreed. Mark hesitated. Option 2, renew with amendments, might be workable. But only if we insert stronger oversight. Monthly reporting, spending caps with penalties, mandatory bid requirements in writing. And option 3? I asked. Risky, Greg said. Changing management is disruptive. Homeowners complain, vendors get confused, records get lost. It's not something to do lightly. We debated for over an hour. Voices rose, tempers flared. Carl wanted blood, termination, immediately. Linda pushed for strict amendments. Susan urged caution. Mark warned about costs. Greg wavered, caught between his dislike of conflict and his duty as president. I listened, took notes, and finally spoke. We have to remember our fiduciary duty, I said. We don't represent ourselves. We represent 200 households. If we let management slide, we're complicit. If we overreact and destabilize the community, we're reckless. The answer lies in balance. Linda leaned forward. And what does balance look like? I flipped to my notes. Here's my proposal. 1. Issue a formal reprimand for the $6,000 payout, documented in the minutes. 2. Demand a detailed invoice and proof of services rendered within 7 days. 3. Table the contract for 30 days, during which time we will review every clause and submit written questions. 4. Explore bids from at least 2 other management companies, quietly, so we have leverage. 5. Hold a follow-up executive session to decide whether to amend or replace. The room went quiet. Blank. Blank. Greg scratched his chin. That might work. It keeps us in control without jumping off a cliff. Susan nodded. I like it. Structured, deliberate. Carl frowned. Too soft. But fine, so long as we actually follow through. No sweeping under the rug. Linda smiled faintly. For once, I agree with Carl. Mark sighed, but even he conceded. All right, but if we go out for bids, we need to keep it discreet. Panic among homeowners will create more problems than it solves. Agreed, Greg said firmly. Blank. We voted, unanimously, to adopt my 5-step plan. For the first time, I felt a strange mix of power and dread. Power, because the plan was mine. Dread, because now the responsibility for carrying it out rested squarely on my shoulders as secretary. As we packed up, Greg clapped me on the shoulder. Good work tonight. You steered us. I nodded, but my mind was already racing. This was just the beginning. The management company wouldn't take a reprimand lightly. And once they caught wind that we were seeking bids, they'd fight to keep their contract. The battle lines had been drawn. And the next meeting promised fireworks. 30 days later, we reconvened in the same clubhouse. This time the air felt charged, as if everyone knew the evening would shape the future of our community. Homeowners filled more chairs than usual. Copies of the management contract sat in thick piles at the front. A few residents even carried highlighters and sticky notes, as though they intended to grade the proceedings themselves. I felt the weight of my binder in my lap. Inside were my notes, questions, and copies of emails exchanged over the past month. I had lived and breathed this contract, dissecting every clause. The $6,000 payout had lit a fire under me, and I refused to let it die until real accountability was written in ink. Blank. Greg opened the meeting with his usual gavel tap. We'll start with unfinished business, the management contract renewal. As you all know, the board tabled this discussion last month to allow for further review. All eyes shifted to Dan, the property manager. He sat stiffly at the far end of the table, his smile frozen. He knew tonight wouldn't be easy. Dan, Greg said, we've submitted questions and requested clarifications. Please walk us through your responses. Dan cleared his throat. We've addressed the board's concerns in writing. Fees remain consistent with industry standards. Emergency authorization procedures have been tightened. Invoices over $500 now require dual signatures within our office before submission to the board. Linda raised her hand immediately. That's nice, but what about vendor selection? How do we ensure we get bids, not just whoever answers your phone? Dan shuffled his papers. We've implemented a requirement for at least 2 competitive bids on any project over $1,000. Over $1,000? I cut in? That's too high. We set the discretionary limit at $500 for a reason. We expect bids above that, not twice that. Murmurs of agreement spread through the audience. Dan adjusted his tie but didn't argue. Carl leaned forward. And what about the $6,000 you already spent? We still haven't seen proof of services rendered. Dan slid a packet across the table. Here is the detailed invoice from the vendor, including itemized labor and equipment. I flipped through it quickly. Chainsaws, hauling, disposal fees. It looked legitimate enough, but the totals still seemed inflated. Carl muttered something under his breath about creative math. Greg held up his hand. Let's focus. The question is not whether the money is gone, it is. The question is whether this contract protects us from it happening again. Blank. Blank. Susan spoke softly but firmly. I believe the answer is no. Not yet. I think we should renegotiate key clauses before signing. And if management won't agree, then we should seek alternatives. Gasps and nods rippled through the residence. The word, alternatives, was like a thunderclap. Dan's smile cracked. With respect, the board is free to seek bids. But I caution you. Transitions are costly and disruptive. Homeowners will feel the impact. That's fearmongering, Linda shot back. If another company can provide better service and transparency, then that disruption is worth it. The audience actually applauded. Dan flushed crimson. Blank. Mark, ever the cautious treasurer, spoke next. We have to be careful. Management transitions can cost tens of thousands in lost efficiency, overlapping fees, and retraining. We need to weigh those costs carefully before acting rashly. Carl pounded the table with his palm. What's rash about demanding honesty? If $6,000 can vanish in a miscommunication, what else are we missing? How many times have we been nickeled and dimed without noticing? The audience murmured again, louder this time. For once, they weren't complaining about weeds or noise violations. They were fired up about governance itself. Blank. Greg sighed heavily. We've heard enough debate. Here are the options. 1. Approve the contract as presented. 2. Approve with amendments we draft tonight. 3. Table again and seek bids from other companies. I felt every eye on me. As secretary, I wasn't just a note-taker tonight. I was the one who had pushed this issue to the forefront. I stood. I propose option 2. Amendments. We insert safeguards into the contract before signing. Specific language, not vague promises. Bids required above $500. Dual board approval for any emergency work over that threshold. Monthly detailed reports, delivered in writing. And if management fails to comply, termination with 30 days notice, no penalties. Applause broke out again. Greg nodded slowly. Is there a second? Seconded, Linda said immediately. All in favor? Hands rose, 6 of us. All opposed? Only Mark hesitated, his hand wavering. But even he finally raised it. Unanimous. The decision was made. The contract would not be signed until rewritten with our amendments. For the first time in years, we had flipped the balance of power. Dan's expression was thunderous. He forced a nod, but I could see the fury in his clenched jaw. He had expected us to cave, to rubber stamp. Instead, we had drawn a line. As secretary, I wrote the words carefully into the record. The board unanimously votes to approve contract renewal only with amendments guaranteeing transparency, fiscal limits, and accountability. It felt like engraving them in stone. After the meeting, residents came up to shake our hands. About time, one said. We paid too much to be kept in the dark. Another added, I was ready to sell my unit. Maybe now I'll stay. Their relief was palpable. Later that night, at home, I sat at my desk with the minutes spread out before me. The pen marks felt heavier than usual, as though I had signed something larger than just paperwork. I thought about the bigger picture. In a community like ours, trust is everything. Homeowners trust the board trusts management. Break one link, and the whole chain snaps. The $6,000 payout had nearly shattered that chain. But maybe, just maybe, we had reforged it, stronger than before. Still, I knew trust was fragile. One mistake could undo months of progress. And I had no illusions. The management company wouldn't forgive us easily. They'd comply with our amendments, yes, but grudgingly, watching for any sign of weakness. Blank. Blank. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window. The rows of townhomes sat quiet, their porch lights glowing like small sentinels. Inside each, families went about their lives, paying bills, cooking dinners, putting kids to bed. They didn't think about budgets, contracts, or fiduciary duties. They assumed we, the board, had it handled. And maybe, just maybe, tonight proved we finally did.
Thanks for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable HOA stories. Have you ever dealt with something this absurd in your own neighborhood? Share your experience in the comments below. I'd love to read your stories. And as always, stay tuned for the next episode.